Welcome to Women Winning Divorce. I am your host, Heather Quick. I am an attorney, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Florida Women's Law Group, the only divorce firm for women by women. I love thinking big, thinking outside the box, creating creative solutions for women, and empowering women to win in all aspects of their life. Our approach at Florida Women's Law Group is to provide women with a strategy to not only achieve their objectives, but win at life. I believe that what may show up as adversity is simply an opportunity to change and improve your life. In each episode, I sit down with innovative professionals and leaders who are focused on how you can be your best self before, during, and after divorce. In these conversations, we are looking at how women can win at life. I have the unique opportunity to meet women when they are at a transition period of life. But that is only the beginning to becoming your best self and winning at life on your terms. With our guests, we enjoy the opportunity to explore ways all women can win and enhance their life, no matter where they are in their journey. Because divorce is just a point in life, not the end and not what defines you, rather a catalyst for your growth. Are you facing the challenges of divorce and feeling overwhelmed? Introducing Divorce 101, your essential online course designed to empower you through the divorce process. I'm Heather Quick, attorney and CEO at Florida Women's Law Group. Gain confidence and clarity with expert guidance on legalities, financial considerations, and your emotional well-being. We believe in empowering you to navigate this journey with strength and knowledge. Enroll in Divorce 101 today and take control of your future. As a valued podcast listener, you will get $100 off the course. So please see the show notes for the promo code and the link. You can also find out more at floridawomensLawGroup.com or always call us at 904-567-0121. Divorce for women by women. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. And today we have Beth Behrendt, the author of Nesting After Divorce, Co-Parenting in the Family Home, a freelance writer and successful nester. Welcome to the show, Beth.
Thank you so much, Heather. It's nice to be here.
Well, we're so happy to have you here. I've heard a lot about nesting. It's happened in several of our cases at times. So I think this is going to be very interesting for all of our listeners, and myself included. But we'd love to hear a little bit more about you, Beth. If you would share a little bit about your journey to what brings you here today professionally.
Sure. Thanks for asking. I have been divorced about, 10 years now. And when my ex decided to divorce our children, we have 3 boys, were 12, 9, and 5 at the time. And I had never heard of nesting, and I happened to run across a reference to it in a divorce book I was reading. And it immediately intrigued me because both Bill, my ex, and I had been very worried about uprooting our children's lives and taking them out of the family home. And so I told him about this concept, and fortunately, he thought it was worth trying to figure out. And 10 years ago, there wasn't much information about it. I think people are fortunate now that not only is there my book, but there are other books. There's tons of stuff on the internet. I have a Facebook group called Family Nesting where people who are nesting communicate with each other. And so there's a lot of resources. But for me and Bill, we really kind of hammered it out ourselves and figured out how to make it work. And it's evolved over these 10 years, but we are actually still nesting because our youngest is still at home, just finished his freshman year of high school. And a few years ago, we decided, since the other 2 had been able to stay in the family home through high school, we were going to try and make that work for our youngest one as well. So there's an end in sight, but it's still a few years away.
Wow, that is quite the long time to continue with that. So let's really jump into it because let's talk about it for a little. What is nesting?
Right. To step back, nesting means that the kids stay in the family home during separation or after divorce, and it's the parents who take turns moving in and out to parent them. So most cases, people keep the family home and the kids there, and the parents find other places to live when they're not in the home parenting. In our case, what we started out doing was we found a small apartment nearby, a 1-bedroom apartment that we rented, and he and I took turns moving in and out of that apartment and then into the house. So we were never in the apartment at the same time, and we were barely in the house at the same time for a number of years. And then eventually things have evolved somewhat since then. But that's how a lot of people start out, trying to find an affordable way to make that happen and, keep the kids in the home.
And where does that term come from? Nesting.
I believe it comes just from the concept of how baby birds are in the nest and the mother and father bird fly in and out, taking turns to care for them because they don't all fit in the nest at the same time.
Right.
So it's also referred to as bird nesting if you're, just Googling about it. Either term will bring up some good information for you.
And so the overall goal is what with nesting?
Well, for most people, the primary goal is to keep life consistent for their kids, to kind of help mitigate the trauma of divorce, that they don't also have the stress of moving between two places, keeping track of their stuff, being away from their neighborhood friends, whatever might be your goals with that. But a lot of people also go into it for financial reasons, because in most cases, it's cheaper to keep one house that houses everything instead of having two separate houses that are large enough to house 3 kids and all their stuff. And so, yes, there is an additional cost compared to being married, where you have some other place you're living. But often people do things like stay with family, or once they have a significant other, stay with the significant other. And so, so the financial part is actually a big part of what draws people to it. And I would say that's what kept us doing it, because we really didn't intend to keep going on for very long. But after a few years, it was great for the kids, and it was saving us money versus each of us having to buy a new house. And it was good for our parenting relationship too.
And that's what's fascinating to me, because my initial thought would be this would be much more expensive. Right? Because you're keeping the home, but I guess it just depends on, if the two of you each have separate living or that sharing, I guess, the apartment. I mean, when you're sharing an apartment back and forth, and I say sharing, even though you're not living there at the same time.
Right. I think too, at least for us, we have 3 children. And so the thought of duplicating furniture for 3 kids, their toys, their computers, their stuff that they're not going to drag back and forth with them. I mean, a lot of people just duplicate wardrobes to make it easier. That's a lot of money for 3 kids to set up 2 separate lives for them, on top of the stress of just keeping track of moving them back and forth, and homework and sports equipment and all that other stuff. So, so there's definitely a less stressful aspect to it, I would say, as well.
I appreciate that, because that didn't occur to me, but I know you're right. Absolutely. Because that is a huge part of, and it doesn't matter what the time sharing is what we call it here in Florida, but no matter what the arrangement, even if it was like back to, what it used to be, maybe every other weekend, well, you still need a place to stay. You still need a place that's comfortable for your children. And certainly when it's shared equally, you want to be comfortable in the bedrooms, and yes, they need their own furniture and their stuff and where they're going to be. So I really hadn't looked at it from that perspective, which I find very interesting. Now, do you think that when you're there are certain ages of children that, make this a better idea, or that you should really consider it?
Yeah, of course it's, depending on the family. I think, perhaps if our children had been older, like into high school, and, maybe 1 or 2 of them were driving already, their lives wouldn't have been that rooted by having to, there would have been help for us shuttling them back and forth.
Yes.
And they would have been close to moving on to college. And so it might not have seemed so daunting to change their environment. But because ours were young, and from what I've read, and I talk about this in my book, some of the real traumatic, what's the word I'm looking for? Just the trauma of divorce is particularly powerful when children are under 13 years old. And so our kids were under that, but also, probably the first, maybe up to 3 or 4 years old, it's not so traumatic to have a change. So, if you have a couple of infants, I don't know if you want to commit to nesting, for that. Like they're going to be okay if you change things up. So I feel like there is sort of a window of grade school age children probably that this is most beneficial to. But I know a family I profiled in my book, they had 2 teenage daughters, and they actually divorced traditionally, but as the girls got into their teenage years, decided to nest because it was really upsetting the girls to have to go away from where their friends were, to be able to, keep track of where their favorite clothes were. And so they found the teenage years were particularly beneficial for their girls to make that switch. So I think it, depends on the kids and the situation.
So I have to ask you this. I have so many questions, but this one. Okay. So now what do you say when, because I'm sure you've heard all the, critiques or questions, just questions like, and the question that comes to my mind, which I have heard before is, okay, if you are now like, how is this truly benefiting children to make them almost the more important than the parents in like the hierarchy, in that they deserve their own home and parents should be shuttled back and forth. And I don't think I'm articulating this in as great as a way as I mean to.
I know. But, yeah.
Okay. What are we talking about? These are children. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that's where I would love to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I feel pretty strongly about this, actually, that we are the ones who brought these kids into the world.
Right.
We're the ones who are initiating this divorce situation. So I feel it's incumbent upon good parents to prioritize how they're going to make this situation work as well as possible for their children. And that doesn't have to be nesting. There's lots of other ways.
Yes.
It really, really annoys me when people say, well, kids are resilient, they'll be fine. I mean, if you talk to even grown-up children of divorce, nobody who went through a traditional divorce looks back and says, yeah, that was pretty great,
Right.
I think anytime I would tell a grown-up who'd been through divorce about what we were doing, they would just be sort of dumbstruck and say, wow, I wish my parents had given that kind of consideration to me when I was a kid. And so I think that adults, and I think times have changed some. I think that was kind of an older mindset from the 80s.
Right.
I think people now are more aware of that children are developmentally different than adults, have different psychological needs than adults. And so nesting might be a good way to help the kids, or at least I do think you should be putting your kids above yourself as much as you can. Until, not like making yourself miserable about it. Of course,
right.
If nesting were going to make me miserable, or certainly if anybody's in a situation where they're at risk by doing this situation with their ex or can't trust their ex, then you have to decide, well, even though it might be nice for the kids, it's putting the whole family at risk, or it's putting me at risk. That's a totally different situation. But I think if you have a workable or conceivably workable co-parenting situation, you should put the needs of the kids first.
And I think, and I want to focus on that, because you've got to be amicable. You've got to be getting along with your ex, because I would think that, and I would love to hear from you, that the divorce where, he or she, somebody's already got somebody else, and like, I'm moving in with the girlfriend, like the idea is not, and maybe it is, but that then, when your ex-husband moves back in for the week, that he brings his girlfriend or new wife with him. Like, I don't think that seems just awkward to me.
No, I agree. And I guess what I might push back on a bit is I think that you can do it even if you're not amicable. Like, I would not describe my ex and myself as amicable when we first divorced, and we certainly had to just communicate, in writing, not in front of the children. We were very strict about, I came into the house as he was walking out the door, like we didn't overlap in the house.
Right.
There are a lot of nesters who do that because then they can just focus on being a parent when they're with the kids and not have the distraction of the ex. And so you can set it up so that there's really little interaction. And a lot of nesters, to address sort of the new girlfriend or significant other or boyfriend, will put some clauses into a nesting agreement or their arrangement as they're divorcing that outlines whether another adult can be in the house or not when the parent's there for parenting time, or if there's a certain amount of time before they're going to consider that. Bill and I, we agreed that once we were dating somebody, like no partners, boyfriends, girlfriends allowed in the nest. But if either of us got to the point where we were dating someone and it felt serious enough that we wanted to introduce the kids to them, we would talk to each other first, Bill and I, and tell them that we were going to do that. And so we knew that the kids were going to be introduced to another important adult, but we still had restrictions for probably like 6 months after that before that person could stay at the nest. Like nest just kind of became, I think for a lot of people, certainly for us though, it becomes sort of this sacred place that's about you and your time with your kids. And so yes, of course you should date when you're not parenting, like, go crazy or spend time with the new love of your life, but that doesn't need to come into the kids right away when they're still divorced. So if you can do that sort of gradually, I think that's a better approach.
Yeah. Oh gosh. And I have so many questions on that. However, I want to focus on, I want to save some of the questions for later that I know people will have, because how do you explain this to your children? Let's talk about that.
That's a good question. When we divorced, as I said, my kids were decided to divorce. Our kids were 12, 9, and 5. And Bill and I had already sort of figured out the nesting a little bit.
Okay.
Before we sat them down to tell them that we were getting a divorce. And for my book, I talked to a number of child therapists, and they suggested that kids really like to know what the plan is when you're giving them big news, So if you just say we're getting divorced and kids don't know what's happening to them, it's even more stressful. And so we went in with, we've decided to get divorced, but like in the same sentence, but you guys are staying in the home. You're staying here in our house. And it's going to be like when daddy goes on a business trip and it's just mommy taking care of you for a while. And then dad will come back and it's like mom's going off on a trip. She'll be gone a few days and then she'll be back. And so they were upset by the word divorce, but once we started talking about that, they just calmed down and they were like, so we'll be with our dog Chloe, we'll be with Chloe all the time. Or yes, we'll always be here. And dad and I will figure it out, but your date, your schedule every day is going to be the same. One of us will make you breakfast and get you to school. And so I think if you can just frame it in kind of as simple terms as possible at first, and then it just depends what you think they need to know, I guess. We did decide to show them the apartment that we were sharing so they could see how close the other parent was to the house. Okay. And we made it clear that we would talk to them each evening, but if the other parent was in the house, like say if Bill's with them, there was a point after a few months, where I had to say to the kids, like, look, you shouldn't call mommy if you can't find your shirt in the morning. Dad's right there. And, he can help you figure it out. And so there was, some like working through the logistics and them understanding who to go to for what. But I think I think because it was pretty easy, at first for them that we all got the hang of it eventually.
Yeah, it is fascinating. Now, what, overall, like, how would you say, I mean, you've talked about a lot of the positives, and I totally see it as far as the, how you can make it positive financially and how I can see that for the kids. What about for you? What about for the parents? Like, what can you say are some positive results that you've experienced?
Well, I think for us, and I mean, I have to be clear that we had a pretty traditional gender roles in our family life.
Okay.
At the time, I was basically the stay-at-home mom. I just did a little bit of freelance writing at that point. So I was the stay-at-home mom, took care of everything. And so that was a big adjustment for me to teach Bill a lot of things that he didn't know how to do, like laundry.
Okay.
Um,
Right.
how, what to make for the kids, what the schedule was, what happens the different days of the week at school, so it was a lot of communicating about that and writing things down, which was hard for me, but it was also nice to then have some days of the week where I didn't have to do all that stuff. And I could really just focus on my career and my exercising and,
Yeah.
having lunch with friends or whatever, where I really didn't get that much totally, free when I was a
Right.
full-time mom. And for Bill, he learned those things and it was frustrating at first. And he still says, like, the thing that he remembers as most stressful about our divorce was having to do all the laundry all the time. Because with 3 kids, it's just kind of a constant thing. And so that's what is still stressful. But the fact that he learned that and learned the kids' schedules and communicated with their teachers, he became such a more involved father than he had been. And in a different way. Like, he was a good dad before, but in the more like daily ins and outs, really got to know that stuff well. And I think that really benefited their relationship. And I've heard that for boys particularly, what can help them be most respectful to women when they grow up, you might think it's seeing their mom work or seeing their mom bring in the money and being a smart, hardworking person, which all moms are. But what actually impacts boys even more is to see their dad doing traditional women's work, like making dinner and buying groceries, and that really has a powerful message to them about, there's not a set division of labor. You work out what makes sense for all of you.
I agree with that.
Answer.
No, but that's a really good answer. Like, and not everybody has that. Like, that's something when I began to really build my business as a lawyer, we had to reassign our responsibilities. And I truly believe that was good. I have girls and boys. It was good for both of them, for the girls to see, one, you can go work, but your partner can support you. And yes, they need to know how to do laundry, cook, shop, do all these things.
Right.
And for the boys too, like, there's nothing wrong with that. You can go to the grocery store, you can make dinner, your clothes are dirty, there's the washer dryer. Like, this is how that works. But because that was one of my things, Beth, I got to tell you, in my mind, I'm like, all right, I come back from nesting for a week, and do I have a pile of laundry and a dirty house? Because I could see that ending that real quick. Like,
well, it
you
certainly
knew
was
ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, it was
had
an
to do
issue
that
here. Yeah, we
Okay.
had to work through for sure, and you don't really know till you get into it about what's going to drive you crazy. And so I didn't really mind if the house was sort of messy, but I did not want to find that there was no milk and there was no bread, and I had to scramble for dinner.
Right.
So it took a few, months of but Bill really hated to come in and the house was just kind of in shambles. And so, before he would come, the kids had to make a little more effort to clean up, because that was important to dad, to come back from work and not feel like he's stumbling over, Legos as soon as he walks in the door. So we had to just kind of communicate about our expectations and then what was realistic or not realistic. And so things evolved some, for sure. I think at first we expected the kitchen to be totally clean and the laundry all done. And then, after a few months, it's kind of well, it's okay if you didn't get all the laundry done, as long as, they have their school clothes or whatever. And then as our kids got older, of course, they could be more helpful, but kind of at first it was a lot on the parent to handle everything. But things evolved for sure.
Now, let's talk about, do you think nesting is for everyone? Like, how do you figure out if it's right for you? Because I would think, you talked about the ages of the kids, obviously very important, but I think that there's got to be a lot that has to be there for the couple, the divorcing parents, to even attempt it, to try to be successful.
Sure. Well, of course, kind of the basics, like I referenced earlier, is, can you trust the other parent to be a good parent while you're not there?
Mm-hmm.
You know, sure, there's the case where they need to learn something, but can you trust that they're actually going to try to learn and will the kids feel safe with the other parent and well taken care of? Can you trust the parent not to be using, you know, alcohol or drugs or bringing strangers into the house when you're not there? And so those are just kind of basics that if you can't, then it's kind of out. And certainly if there's any kind of abuse or whatever, you should not be considering it. But the other things that need to be there are an ability to communicate with your ex, even if you are, you know, mad about the divorce, but if you can't find a way to talk about the kids and co-parenting, which really should be the case if you have kids and a divorce anyway, whether you're nesting or just co-parenting, you have to
be able to have some kind of communications,
a lot of
which very many people cannot. I mean, it's, you know, and I see the more of the ones that cannot, right? Because so many people can. And then it's not as litigious, but there's certainly a minority that it is just very difficult. Communication, even in writing, it's just,
and so they're probably not going to make nesting work.
And they're not going to, they wouldn't want to make it work. So you've got to want, to make it work.
You've got to want to do it. And I think it helps too, if you do have some thoughts, of course, about where you're going to live when you're not in the nest. Like that's a pretty key factor. And so I initially lived at my parents' for maybe a month before we kind of got around to getting the apartment. And so we had and Bill was traveling a lot for work. So he would just do his work trips. And but we certainly, you know, had to kind of have that in place before we told the kids we were going to do it. Because say we didn't want to tell them something and then not have it happen. So I think you need to get some basics in line before you communicate with the kids and commit to it. And a lot of people, I think a lot more attorneys or mediators are aware of nesting now. And so it is helpful to talk to somebody about the financial aspects and the legal aspects of what you're doing and make sure that, you know, you both feel protected in the situation that you're setting up, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I'm phrasing that right, but that's a good thing to discuss too early on, you know, with your attorney if you're moving to divorce.
Well, and I think so. I think if, you know, even though the parent, you know, even though you guys, all right, we agree we're going to divorce, or I don't agree with it, but we're divorcing, it's happening, right? But there has to be an agreement that we want to make this as easy for our children as possible. And we're willing to put aside some of our differences in order to make that happen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And do what we find is a sacrifice ourselves in order to give them this period of adjustment, because it might not be for 10 years, right? Like you, but
probably not.
Probably not. That is stunning. That is still. Now, do you guys still share an apartment, or has that changed?
That stopped after about the first, I don't know if we even made it 2 years with that.
Okay.
Not much after a year, actually, because then Bill did get his own apartment, but then he started traveling a bunch for work. So it didn't make sense for him to have his own apartment when he wasn't even in town. But it also meant that we had then we didn't have a set schedule. Like I just came in the house when he needed to travel. And so it wasn't an every like Wednesday to Sunday like it had been, which worked fine for me because of my freelance writing job. Right. But that might be a challenge for people too, is how do your own careers, you know, can you support this schedule?
And what is it? Tell us let's talk a little bit about schedule, because I mean, that's going to be important. Like, you know, how do people figure that out? Like what have you seen? Because you've done a lot of research, how it helped a lot of people.
I think a lot of people who are interested in nesting are hoping to have, you know, 50-50 parenting.
Right.
I don't think it has to be that way, but pretty much everybody I talk to is trying to set up that kind of schedule. And so it's interesting because in my book, it ranged from there was a couple who lived in New York City, and they actually went in and out every other day.
Oh,
wow. They lived right, you know, just like right down the street from each other, and they wanted to see their kids that often. So it seems like a lot to me, but they loved just being easy, you know, they could just walk over. It was easy kind of thing to do. We did a schedule of, I would come in Wednesday mornings and stay till Saturday afternoon, and then Bill would come in. So we each kind of had half the weekend running to the weekend stuff, and we each had 2.5 days of school days.
Yeah.
And so that was just what we set up, and we stuck with that for a while, or whenever Bill wasn't traveling, we'd kind of default back to that. But some people do, just a week on, week off, or the 3, what is it, 3-2-3 that some people.
Yeah,
do.
2-2-3,
2-2-3,
yeah. And that's sometimes when the kids are much younger,
right.
that tends to work. And then, I think, like you said, the reason like the week on or the 2-2-3 is helpful, because then you have like the demands of the weekday, but also the fun of the weekend, right? Like that's, I think,
Yeah.
generally the goal is to have a little bit of both.
Right. And I think a lot of people find themselves, even we certainly did with 3 kids for a while there, before anybody could drive, was, even though it may have been technically my Saturday, if there was a birthday party and a sporting event and another something going, Bill would help drive them. It wasn't like,
right, this is your weekend, that's on you.
Yeah,
You have
too
to
bad.
figure it out.
We
Yeah.
would try and help them still get to the stuff that they needed to do. So I think the longest I heard one couple who did 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, but they eventually stopped doing that because they felt like it was too long of a time away from the kids. So, that's the other thing too. I think important with nesting and probably co-parenting in general is to keep in mind that it doesn't have to stay the way you set it up, right as you're divorcing. It can evolve as
Right.
the older, as you have new things in your life. And so, maybe don't get too hung up on, we're doing this forever. Like you don't have to do it that way forever.
Which, I love that you said that, because of course, in the court system, right, this is it forever. And
yeah,
it's, and it's like, well, gosh, but the court can't, like, plan things future and say, oh, well, that would still be in the best interest of the kids. But parents can do that.
right.
Parents can adapt, and parents can say, you know what, our kids need this now.
Right.
So now we need to pivot a little and change it, which is real life.
Right.
And the most successful divorced couples recognize that and don't hold it against the other for doing that. But yeah, that makes sense. And go into it with, we're going to try it. And if it doesn't work, let's maybe work through another way.
Yeah.
To do it. Now, what about, okay, because we did talk a little bit about the finances, but how do we split bills on the nest? How does that work?
Another big area of communication for sure. Yes. Yeah, people set up different things. We were a little bit guided by what I live in Indiana, and the Indiana state laws for divorce are about, child support, which probably is pretty similar to everywhere else, that, it was based on our disparity in incomes and how much time we were spending with the kids. So we took kind of that same guideline for things like the grocery bill and their clothing expenses. And we did end up deciding, in our case at least, that it made sense, because Bill made more money than I did, that he would cover the house expenses, but I would cover the apartment when we started out that way.
Oh, okay.
I paid
That
the
seems,
rent and the utilities there and stuff. And then we split kind of the child related things in the nest. We've evolved some of that stuff as things have changed with how we live and how much time we spend with the kids. But that's still kind of the basic rule of thumb, is, the differences that we make and things fairly with the kids. So,
and I would imagine this will be just me thinking that the plan is, when your oldest, now that you've agreed, like, well, we'll try to, we'll keep doing this through his high school, that then when you sell the house, there is already in place an agreement as to who gets what on that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And some people I know do continue to keep the house, together. They own it together. The people I know who do that, yeah, they kind of made the same amount of salary. And so we're really pretty straightforward to split things evenly. At the time we split, my attorney did not think it was a good idea for me to try and own the house with Bill. Like, he just thought that would be complicated. So Bill has always been technically the owner of the house, but we've sort of, figured in considerations over the years of then when it is time to sell the house, there will be some financial benefit to me because of the care I've given it and things I've done for the benefit of the, so it's a lot of keeping track of stuff.
I
So
would say
if
so,
you
right.
don't, which maybe a regular divorce would be that as well. I imagine it probably is to some extent, but yeah, there's a lot of keeping track and kind of thinking ahead to what might we need to figure out.
Well, right. Like, for instance, depending on how long it goes on, and sometimes when the court does it, and my only experience, they've done nesting for on a temporary basis. And I think obviously the parties would have to agree. That wouldn't be anything a court would do on a permanent basis.
Right, they wouldn't force it. Yeah.
But then say one party lives in the marital home, in the family home with the children until the youngest is 18, but they both own it. And then that way, but then major expenses like the roof, the AC, the water heater, those are going to be split.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's what you're saying. Your attorney was like, that could really be, that could be disadvantageous to you because of the disparity in income. And so,
yeah,
right, because that becomes an issue. A house is a house with a lot of expenses.
Yeah.
And, one person will be like, oh, well, we're going to sell it and split it at the end. But yet I'm the one who's put all of the, handled all of these things. So is again another thing that needs to be discussed.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And there are different ways to do it, I'm sure. And like you mentioned too, I just wanted to touch on the concept of doing it temporarily. And I think it's okay. And we did ourselves to go into nesting with like, we're going to try this for a while. Like we'd agreed, we're going to try a year, right, and then assess how it's going. And so I think that that's probably the best approach to take is, we're going to commit for a certain amount of time. I think a year is maybe 6 months. So you get kind of a feel for, hitting your stride a little bit, but we really felt then by like 2 years into it, it was just very comfortable and easy for both of us that we couldn't really think why we would change it. So,
well, and I think you're right. You got to give it a certain period of time because to iron out the kinks, like you said, like the cleanliness, the laundry, the groceries, like the things that when people are, not on the same page and in disagreement, they see those things as intentional and things that are being done intentionally. But very often, possibly, it's not. It's just there's a lot going on. And so, and personalities and priorities, right? Yeah. Like, well, the house may not be that clean, but they all went to school, their homework was done, and they were fed. And like, sometimes it's like, that was a big win. So like, cut me some slack on some other stuff because, we were doing that. So I can see where if you're going to go into it, you got to be willing to give it some time to work through those things that will inevitably come up.
Yeah. And then I guess the follow-on point to that is if you decide it's not working, you need to have a good plan for that as well, and how you're going to end it and how you're going to explain it to the kids, and, the gradual steps that you're going to take to move out of it without, going into debt or traumatizing, everybody. So that's a process too, for sure.
Right. Now, have you seen, like, we're talking about the nest being the family home, right? With that main concern, like there's not the disruption, right? We're going to keep the friends, the neighborhood and all that. But have you seen other arrangements where maybe it just wasn't possible to keep that home, but they did nesting with maybe a new place or something? I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. That, the couple I mentioned earlier who had the teenage girls and decided to do it, that they decided to find a house that was close to the school so the girls could walk to school. And so, yeah, they did kind of uproot the current situation of the two houses and come into a new place that hadn't been the family home because it just made sense for their kids at that point. But yeah, I think it tends to default to people using the family home because that's what's easy, but certainly it doesn't have to be that, if it makes sense to do something else, it's cheaper or easier for all of you, why not?
Now, okay, I'm not asking for anything confidential, but I am just curious, and you've done a lot of research as well. Was this, because you've been doing this a long time, like, was this something where your attorney was just like, what are you thinking? Like, what is this concept that you two are doing? I'm wondering if there was some pushback on either side that you two had to really fight for, like, no, this is really what we want to try to do?
I think we were pretty lucky, especially since it was 10 years ago and we live in not a very large city in Indiana. So it was, it wasn't heard of, but my attorney had heard of it.
Okay.
And what he said to me was he felt like the conversations we'd already had about the divorce, he felt confident that I was going to put the work into making it work. You know what I mean? So
Right. Yeah.
he felt like he said he felt like he trusted me in that, even though it was an unusual thing for him to hear about. The challenge for him was as he said, was to think about how to word it so the courts would understand, because it was, not very common.
And to protect you and your interests,
Exactly.
because usually, ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. We're like, okay, well, even if this does work, if it doesn't, how are you still gonna be legally protected?
Yeah. But I think some people do encounter that the attorney doesn't, like the idea. And so then I guess you maybe need to find somebody else to work with if they're not going to. If you feel strongly that's the right thing, then.
And it's been a while, but there certainly were judges in our jurisdiction, and I don't know that they would have signed a judgment on that. Really, because they would have been like, this will never work. And so then you're just going to be back here. They used to not ever sign things that agreed to 50-50.
Wow.
They would change that. Like, I've been practicing long enough that's been the way it was, but which is not appropriate, right? Let people, you have the right to decide, what is going to work for your family and your children. Now, let me ask you this question, because, it doesn't have to be just personal. Obviously, you've done a lot of research and have helped so many people, but do you find that nesting is harder emotionally compared to a divorce where you and your ex are really living completely separately?
I can't say from personal experience because I didn't do the traditional approach. It certainly was challenging for both of us. I think, in most divorces, one of us wanted the divorce more than the other person. And so then you start to resent the work you're doing. But because it was for the kids, ultimately we would, kind of come around to it. But looking back, I think what was really good for us that would not have happened, I'm certain, in a traditional divorce, was that we couldn't just stay mad at each other and just like drop the kids off in the driveway and drive away. We kind of had to deal with stuff that affected all of us in the house, and we had to have conversations, and we did overlap a lot, and then it became more comfortable. Then eventually it was easier just to stick around, have a glass of wine, talk about what's coming up the next week, instead of just rush off. And so I think I don't know that we would have gotten to that point of being more like friends now than we were. And so I often say, and Bill would agree, that like we're better partners now than we were when we were married.
Right.
And I do kind of credit nesting for forcing us into that, I guess.
Now, I would imagine, I don't know this, but I would, because you guys are still doing it, I am going to assume, but I don't know. Are either of you remarried? Because how would that work?
Surprise, surprise. Yes. Bill has been married for a couple of years. And so when he's not in the nest, and even, while they were dating, he would go to his partner's house and then come into the nest. And so that's what he continues to do. And then since they've been married, she sometimes comes with him, and I am engaged now. And so I go to my fiance's house instead of that apartment that I kept for years and years in the nest. And so we have incorporated those people into the nesting situation. And we are very fortunate that they were not intimidated by it, that and kind of ironically, they both are people who are divorced with kids. So they, in a way, appreciated it. Her kids were out of the house. Both of them, it wasn't like the kids were really like, the kids weren't being shuttled in and out of our house.
Yes, right.
And so we have gotten to the point of dating and finding, somebody else, and still doing the nesting, and they've been, patient and supportive. So We're lucky.
Which would be necessary in order for it to work. Because, in our experience, many times after the divorce, or even during the divorce, but it's the new person that then kind of really can stir the pot a lot.
Yeah, I think we were really lucky because I've never felt like his girlfriend, now wife, she was never trying to be the mom. She was never trying to, and she never seemed to resent, if I was here with Bill,
right. Your relationship as parents.
Yeah,
that's it. Right.
Was
yeah.
intimidated by that. And my partner is the same way that so and I guess kind of surprisingly to me, the people I interviewed in the book were 5 families, and I think 4 of them had all found, or had either remarried or had a significant partner, after some time of doing nesting. So it's not impossible.
Well, and now that we're talking more about it, because when I first said it, I'm thinking that's going to be hard, but actually, you really have evolved emotionally, personally, to move beyond a romantic relationship, beyond a adversarial relationship, to be like, we're just partners in parenting.
Right.
And obviously then you attracted other partners that recognize that's our job as parents.
Right.
We can parent and not be romantically involved. You obviously are dating people. You probably wouldn't be attracted to people who would not understand that because of what you guys have been through and seen that successfly. So that is just fascinating.
And what I liked about it too was that when I was with my boyfriend, now fiance, it wasn't here in the house with the kids. It was just us.
Yeah.
I was completely free of the mothering aspect of my life, unless there was an emergency or something. But it was really nice. I kind of liked not having him here in the house while I was parenting young kids. I focused on the kids when I was with the kids, and then when I was with him, it was just, we could focus on each other. And so that was nice. And I think nesting helped with that because it wasn't like he was coming into my home,
it creates some boundaries.
Yeah.
And then you were able to have a boundary as like, okay, this can be Beth as the single person. Okay, switch hats. Now I'm Beth mom. I mean, you're always both, but yet you could set boundaries in that relationship too. No, these are my days. I got to go do that. It just doesn't, until it's more serious, you don't get access to that or whatever.
Yeah.
That's really cool though. Actually, I mean, you've really opened my eyes, and I am thinking about this in such a different way than I did coming into it. So I'm really, I think it's really fascinating, and definitely for the right people and the right families, I can see how it can be very successful.
Yeah. And I think, my motivation with the book was really, I feel like a lot of people still don't even think about it as a possibility.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying, it's the best way necessarily, but I think there are a lot of people who just don't even think about it, just assume, like I had until I stumbled across the reference. I just assumed you had to split into 2 houses and never talk to each other again. And that was just the way divorce was. But divorce can be done different ways. And a lot of them can, be pretty good for the kids. So,
well, and really, absolutely, and mostly it's going to be best for the kids as well as the parents if you two can, come to consensus on certain things, because otherwise a stranger's making the decisions, and those are going to be very formulaic, guideline, just things that have no real bearing on your individual family, because that's just the way the courts work. It's just going to be, you're going to be divorced, in a schedule versus, and that's where, coming to agreements, mediating, being able to at least see someone else's side, and also from the perspective of the children, can allow parties to really craft an agreement that, can withstand the time and really work for both people and the kids.
Yeah.
which
it's good
is
to know.
challenging, but
Yeah.
also definitely worth it. I'm sure. Obviously, you're still doing it. You think it's been worth it.
Yeah, I think it's been great for the kids and for us too. But I think any kid just have a little bit of kind of easing into divorce life instead of it being, real drastic change is probably a good way to
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a great conversation, Beth. I've learned so much. I so appreciate it.
Thanks.
But before we go, I'd love it if you could impart on our listeners what you've learned about women, and their resilience throughout your career and experience.
Oh my gosh. Well, women are really behind it all, aren't they? Like I feel, not to downplay men, but I feel like the ideas come from women and the consistent follow-up comes from the women. And I think that a really successful woman finds a way to put herself first and her kids and her values, all as a priority. But that doesn't mean sublimating yourself. Like you do have to be your own priority.
Yes. That's awesome. And I get that from this conversation, right? Like where we started out, and I'm asking, I don't think that you have not put what you need in your life as not a priority. You have been able to coexist with those.
Certainly not. Yeah. And I think I needed to get divorced to get to that point. So
very interesting. I think sometimes that's the way it works, right? And probably that's what your husband had to do in order to probably become the father that he was really able to be, that he wasn't going to be if he stayed married. Lastly, Beth, though, where can our listeners find you for more information and resources?
Okay, well, you can look at familynesting.org, and that's all the nesting content and links to things I've written. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're on Facebook, there's a family nesting private group that you can join so that, other people won't see that you're in it, and you can get information from other people who are nesting. And you can also look on TikTok for Beth Behrendt or Instagram.
Well, thank you so much. And for our listeners, we will put all of those links in the show description so that you can find those resources and learn more about nesting. Well, we've reached the end of our show. Thank you so much, Beth Behrendt, for joining us today to discuss co-parenting and nesting.
My pleasure. Thank you, Heather. I've enjoyed it.
Well, it's been great. And listeners, if you or someone you know is going through divorce or is thinking about a divorce and are located in the Northeast Florida area, please reach out to us at floridawomensLawGroup.com or join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce, where we have created a community of women and have positive and supportive conversations. You'll find the links in the episode description. And if you enjoyed the show, we truly appreciate a 5-star review to help other women going through similar challenges to find us. We value your feedback, so please share your thoughts on today's episode. Our email's in the description as well. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Women Winning Divorce. My goal is to elevate your life and the way you are thinking so that you are best equipped to win at life. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe so you automatically get my new shows every week. And I would love to hear from you personally. Come join the conversation on social and join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce. We welcome your comments and suggestions. We want to bring you content that helps move your life forward. Women Winning Divorce is the place for an elevated conversation on how women can thrive during times of adversity in order to live their best life.